My name is Aliyah. I am 35 years old. We were attending an awards gala hosted by a Fortune 500 company in New York. The crystal chandeliers of the Vanguard Hotel cast a golden glow over the lobby, illuminating the elite crowd gathering for the night. As we approached the registration desk, my father Desmond proudly waved his VIP guest pass for everyone to see. He turned to me, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "What are you doing here?" he sneered with a smug grin. "You do not belong in a place like this. Go wait outside." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or cause a scene. I simply reached into my clutch and handed my confirmation code to the receptionist. She took the digital scanner and ran it over the screen. The polite, practiced smile on her face instantly disappeared. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as the screen flashed gold. She immediately stood up straight, her hands actually trembling. She turned to the billionaire CEO standing nearby and stammered, "Sir, she is here." The CEO did not even look at my father. He rushed forward and bowed respectfully to me. Desmond stood there, his jaw practically hitting the marble floor, the VIP pass slipping from his fingers. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who severely underestimated your worth. 3 weeks before that unforgettable night at the Vanguard, my family summoned me to a high-end steakhouse in Manhattan. The restaurant was famous for its exorbitant prices and exclusive clientele. It was exactly the kind of place my parents Desmond and Patricia loved to frequent to maintain their carefully curated facade. They spent their entire lives projecting the image of a perfect, wealthy black family. In reality, it was all smoke and mirrors. I arrived at the restaurant and took my seat across from them. Sitting next to my parents was my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Beside her sat her new fiancé, Trayvon. Trayvon was a flashy, loud man who constantly bragged about his status as a cryptocurrency startup founder. He wore a sharp, tailored suit and a chunky gold watch that he made sure to flash every time he picked up his water glass. But I spent my days evaluating wealth and investments. It took me less than 10 seconds to recognize that his watch was a cheap replica. The gold plating was slightly off and the weight of it was entirely wrong. Yet my parents treated him like royalty. Patricia leaned across the table, her face glowing with manufactured pride. She loudly announced to our corner of the restaurant that Chloe and Trayvon were getting married. Desmond patted Trayvon on the back, calling him a visionary and the son he always wanted. They spent the first 30 minutes of the dinner praising Trayvon for his alleged massive success and fawning over Chloe for landing such a perfect catch. I sat there quietly sipping my sparkling water. I knew my role in these gatherings. I was supposed to be the audience to their greatness. I was the dark cloud they tolerated, only so they could contrast their shining success against my perceived mediocrity. My mother made sure to casually ask about my job in a tone dripping with pity, assuming I was still struggling to make ends meet. I gave vague answers, letting them believe whatever they wanted. I had learned long ago that sharing my actual life with them only led to resentment and sabotage. The waiter brought out towering platters of seafood, expensive cuts of steak, and bottles of imported wine. Trayvon ordered the most expensive items on the menu without a second thought, loudly proclaiming that he was celebrating closing a massive deal. The atmosphere was thick with their self-congratulatory laughter and exaggerated stories of wealth. It felt suffocating. I watched them perform their roles perfectly, knowing exactly what was coming next. My family never invited me to expensive dinners simply to catch up. There was always a catch, an ulterior motive hidden beneath the forced smiles and expensive appetizers. And as the dinner plates were cleared away to make room for dessert, the true reason for this little family reunion finally revealed itself. Desmond reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper. He did not pass it gently. He abruptly slid the paper across the polished mahogany table directly toward me. It stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down at it, my expression neutral. It was an invoice from an ultra-luxury event venue in the Hamptons. The total amount due at the bottom of the page was $50,000. It was the non-refundable deposit required to secure the location for Chloe's upcoming wedding. I looked up from the paper and met my father's eyes. Desmond crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair with a look of absolute entitlement. "You need to take care of this by Friday," he demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It is the deposit for your sister's wedding venue." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand hang in the air. "You want me to pay $50,000 for Chloe's wedding venue?" I asked evenly. Patricia chimed in immediately, her tone laced with that familiar condescending edge. "Oh, do not act like it is such a burden, Aaliyah. You are a single woman. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities holding you back. You should be happy to step up and contribute to your sister's big day." Desmond nodded in agreement, leaning forward to press his point. "Exactly. Your sister is making something of herself. She is marrying a brilliant entrepreneur and building a real legacy. You are just floating through life. It is time you finally make yourself useful to this family. Stop embarrassing us with your lack of ambition and do something right for once." Trevon chuckled softly from across the table, shaking his head as if my reluctance was amusing. "Come on now, Aaliyah," Trevon said smoothly, adjusting his fake Rolex. "Do not be stingy. It is just a deposit. I would cover it myself right now. But all my capital is tied up in a massive $2 million seed round. My funds are locked in high-yield investments. You understand how high-level finance works, right? Or maybe you do not." Chloe rolled her eyes, sighing loudly. "Daddy, I told you not to ask her. She is always so selfish. She cannot stand seeing me happy and successful." I looked at the four of them, a unified front of manipulation and pure greed. They genuinely believed they could bully me into financing their delusions of grandeur. They thought I was the same weak, eager-to-please girl I had been a decade ago. They thought I would empty whatever small savings they assumed I had just to buy a scrap of their approval. They expected me to cave under the weight of their judgment, to feel so ashamed of my single status that I would purchase my worth in their eyes for $50,000. The sheer arrogance was almost impressive, but they had absolutely no idea who was actually sitting across from them. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or try to defend my life choices. Instead, a vivid memory flashed right through my mind. 10 years ago, standing in my father's study. I was 22, holding my acceptance letter for a master's degree program in architecture. I had desperately needed my college fund to pay the tuition. But Desmond had looked at me with cold indifference and told me the account was completely empty. He had secretly drained every single penny of my savings to pay off his own bad debts and to buy Chloe a brand new Porsche for her graduation. "Women do not need higher education," he had told me that day. "Step aside for the real star of the family." He had kicked me out of the house with just one suitcase because I dared to cry about my stolen future. I survived that profound betrayal. I built an empire from the ashes of that bitter rejection. Now, a full decade later, he wanted me to fund the golden child once again. The absolute nerve of him was unbelievable. I calmly picked up the $50,000 invoice. I did not rip it up or throw it back. I simply slid the piece of paper right back across the table, stopping it exactly in front of Desmond. "Not my wedding," I said, my voice steady and cold as solid ice. "Not my bill today." The crisp evening air of Manhattan hit my face stepping out of the steakhouse. I took a steadying breath, completely unbothered by the dramatic scene I had just left behind in the dining room. Marcus was waiting at the curb. He stood at attention beside my black Maybach, instantly opening the rear door the moment he saw me approach. I slid into the plush leather seat, enjoying the absolute silence of the soundproof cabin as the heavy door clicked shut, cutting off the noise of the bustling city streets. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the chilled compartment, letting the smooth ride soothe my mind. I was not upset. I was not crying over my family and their toxic behavior. I had accepted who they were a long time ago. My only focus now was returning to my penthouse and preparing for my early morning meetings. But my brief moment of tranquility was suddenly interrupted. My private encrypted cell phone began to vibrate violently against the center console. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw the caller ID. It was Harrison, my lead estate attorney. Harrison never called me on my personal line after business hours unless it was an absolute emergency. I set my glass down and answered the call immediately, my business instincts instantly taking over. "Good evening, Harrison," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "What requires my attention at this hour?" "Alia." "I apologize for the late interruption." Harrison began, his tone tight with professional urgency. "We have a severe security flag on one of your properties. I need your immediate confirmation on a transaction." My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "Which property?" "The historic brownstone in Brooklyn," he replied. "Your grandmother estate." The air in the luxury car suddenly felt freezing cold. That brownstone was not just another asset in my massive portfolio. It was the only piece of genuine family history I cared about. It was the house where my grandmother had raised me, the place where I had felt truly loved before she passed away. She had bypassed my parents entirely and left the property solely to me, knowing Desmond would sell it in a heartbeat to fund his flashy lifestyle. I had spent a fortune restoring it, fiercely protecting it from the rest of my greedy relatives. "I have not authorized any transactions regarding the brownstone," I stated firmly. "What exactly is happening?" "Someone is actively trying to close a massive mortgage against the equity of the house," Harrison explained, the urgency in his voice rising. "They submitted the final paperwork to a mid-tier lending firm this afternoon. The mortgage broker flagged it and contacted our office because the routing numbers for the cash disbursement did not match your established corporate accounts." I felt a dangerous, icy calm wash over me. Someone was trying to steal the house. "How much cash are they pulling out?" I asked. $300,000, Harrison confirmed. "They are attempting to withdraw this cash against the property. The lending firm received a signed power of attorney document granting your sister Chloe full authorization to leverage the estate. The paperwork also includes your verified signature on the primary loan application and the property deed transfer forms. My signature is on those documents." I repeated, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Harrison, I have not signed a single piece of paper regarding that brownstone since the day the deed was transferred into my name 5 years ago." "I know," Harrison replied smoothly. "That is exactly why I initiated the security protocol. Our forensic team has already pulled the digital scans of the documents they submitted to the lender. The signatures are exceptionally well done, Alia. They managed to replicate the exact pressure points and looping structure you use on your official corporate filings, but the notary stamp on the power of attorney form gave them away. It traces back to a small notary public located right inside the corporate lobby of the real estate firm where your father currently works. They forged my signature," I said, stating the absolute reality of the situation out loud. "Desmond and Chloe committed federal fraud to rob me of my only inheritance." "Yes," Harrison confirmed. "Your father and your sister fabricated the entire package. They thought that by using a mid-tier lender instead of one of your primary banking institutions, they could slip the transaction through without triggering our internal oversight algorithms. They severely underestimated our surveillance network." I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest of the Maybach, staring blankly at the dark-tinted ceiling, my own flesh and blood. The very people who had just spent the last 2 hours dining across from me, mocking my career and demanding that I hand over $50,000 to fund a lavish wedding, were actively orchestrating a massive criminal conspiracy to bleed my grandmother legacy dry. They were sitting at that steakhouse laughing and eating expensive food while they believed they were successfully stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars right out from under me. "Do you want me to contact the authorities?" Harrison asked, breaking the heavy silence. "A forgery of this magnitude involving interstate wire requests and real estate fraud is a severe federal offense. I can have the FBI involved by tomorrow morning and secure warrants for their immediate arrest." I closed my eyes, feeling a dark, predatory smile slowly form on my lips. The absolute audacity of their plan was staggering. They had mistaken my quiet boundaries for weakness. "No," I told Harrison. "Do not call the authorities just yet. Freeze the transaction completely, but tell the lending firm that it is a routine internal audit. Do not let my family know that we have intercepted the fraudulent paperwork. We will handle this my way. I will crush them all myself tonight. They will pay dearly for this crime against me very soon, I promise you. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the leather seat beside me. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking into place inside my mind. $300,000 was a very specific amount to steal. I knew Desmond and Chloe were vain and utterly obsessed with maintaining their wealthy facade, but committing outright federal forgery meant they were drowning in a level of desperation I had not fully anticipated. I mentally traced back the events of the evening. Trayvon had been sweating profusely at the restaurant when his fake gold card was declined. He had loudly bragged about closing a $2 million seed round for his cryptocurrency startup. But a man with $2 million in fresh capital does not panic over a declined dinner bill. His company was not thriving. It was bleeding cash at an uncontrollable rate. He was likely facing complete and total financial ruin right now. Chloe, obsessed with securing a luxury wedding, needed a massive influx of cash to keep the illusion alive. And then there was my father. Desmond had been dropping hints for the last 6 months about a highly coveted regional vice president position opening up at the corporate real estate firm where he worked. He had continuously bragged that the promotion was practically guaranteed to be his. But the corporate world did not operate on empty arrogance. It operated on buy-ins, expensive networking, and significant capital investments. Desmond was trying to buy his way into the partnership. He needed a massive sum of liquid cash to secure his newly elevated position at the firm, and he did not have it. His entire life was heavily financed by debt, high-interest loans, and a desperate need to appear superior to everyone around him. Together, the three of them had concocted this absolutely vile scheme. Trayvon needed a bailout for his failing scam of a startup. Chloe needed her extravagant dream wedding to be fully funded. Desmond needed to purchase his promotion to maintain his fragile ego. And instead of earning the money themselves, they had decided to simply steal it from the only family member who had actually worked hard enough to build genuine self-sustaining wealth. They honestly believed I was an easy target. They assumed I was just a struggling, naive woman who would never notice a second mortgage silently placed on an old historic property. They had zero idea that I had spent the last decade building a billion-dollar venture capital empire. They had zero idea that my security protocols were tighter than most federal banks. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. As the Maybach glided smoothly through the vibrant, brightly lit streets of the city, my initial shock completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless determination. They wanted to play a high-stakes financial game with my legacy. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you attempt to rob a predator tonight. The silence inside the Maybach was absolute, but my mind was operating at lightning speed. My encrypted phone vibrated against the leather seat for the second time in less than 10 minutes. This time the caller ID flashed with the name of my chief of security, Vance. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Vance never called unless he had successfully executed a critical interception. "We have the physical package, Aaliyah." He reported, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. Harrison briefed me on the digital trail, but my team just secured the original hard copies from the courier before they could reach the underwriter's final processing desk. "I want every single page scanned and sent to my secure tablet right now," I ordered. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. The historic brownstone in Brooklyn was not merely a building to me. It was the only place in the world that had ever felt like a true home. When my grandmother passed away, she deliberately bypassed my father Desmond, knowing his reckless financial habits would lead to the property being auctioned off to the highest bidder within months. She had quietly transferred the deed solely into my name. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece with original mahogany staircases, stained glass windows, and a garden that still bloomed with her favorite lavender every spring. I had poured millions into silently restoring and protecting it, installing state-of-the-art security systems and placing it under layers of corporate anonymity specifically to keep my family away from it. Yet somehow Desmond and Chloe had found a crack in the armor. "How did they bypass the initial title flags?" I asked Vance, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "They used an obscure legal loophole," Vance explained. Desmond leveraged his position at his real estate firm to push the appraisal through an unverified third-party inspector. They deliberately targeted a predatory mid-tier lending institution that specializes in high-risk, high-interest equity loans. These lenders do not ask questions when they see a property worth millions owned outright with zero existing debt. They simply saw the brownstone as a massive piggy bank. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They were not just trying to take out a standard mortgage, they had targeted a predatory lender, which meant the interest rates would be exorbitant. If the loan went into default, which it absolutely would given their financial incompetence, the lender would seize the property immediately. They were willing to risk the complete and total loss of my grandmother's legacy just to get their hands on quick cash. "Send me the files, Vance," I commanded. "I want to see exactly how they managed to fake my authorization." The tablet resting on the console chimed within seconds. I disconnected the call and picked up the device. I took a slow breath, letting the cool air of the cabin fill my lungs. I was a woman who dealt in billions, who ruthlessly negotiated international mergers, but this felt entirely different. This was a deeply personal violation. I stared at the blank screen of the tablet, preparing myself for what I was about to see. I tapped the encrypted application icon and entered my biometric passcode. The screen illuminated the dark cabin, displaying a high-resolution scan of a commercial loan application. I stared at the digital pages, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept discussed over a phone call. It was right there in black and white, staring back at me in high definition. I swiped to the third page and stopped. There at the bottom of the property transfer authorization was my signature. It was an incredibly precise forgery. The loops, the pressure points, the exact slant of my handwriting were perfectly replicated. But looking closely, I could see the slight hesitation marks, the microscopic jagged edges where the pen had been moved slowly and deliberately rather than with natural fluid motion. Chloe had always been good at copying things. When we were younger, she used to forge our mother's signature on her failing report cards. Now she was using that same deceitful skill to commit massive federal fraud. I scrolled down to the requested loan amount, $300,000. The number was printed boldly across the top of the disbursement form. They were attempting to pull $300,000 of pure equity out of a property they did not own. But the most damning piece of evidence was the power of attorney document attached to the back of the file. It explicitly granted Chloe full legal authority to act on my behalf, claiming I was out of the country and unavailable to sign the final closing documents in person. And right next to Chloe's signature was the official notary stamp of Desmond's real estate firm. My own father had personally overseen the notarization of a fraudulent legal document, enabling his golden child to steal from his forgotten daughter. The magnitude of their betrayal was staggering. This was not a crime of passion or a sudden mistake. This was a highly calculated, premeditated conspiracy. They had to research the property value, locate a shady lender draft, the fake power of attorney practice my signature until it was passable, and coordinate the notary stamp without raising suspicion at Desmond's office. They had likely been planning this for weeks while simultaneously smiling in my face and demanding I pay for a $50,000 wedding venue. They viewed me as nothing more than a convenient resource to be exploited and discarded. They genuinely believed I was too oblivious to notice a massive lien being placed on my most prized possession. I traced my finger over the forged signature on the screen. A slow, dark anger settled deep into my bones, replacing the initial shock. They had crossed a line from which there was absolutely no return. This was no longer just about family toxicity or arrogant behavior at a fancy dinner. This was a brazen criminal act, and I was the only one holding all the evidence. Every single document in this file was a testament to their greed. They had completely disregarded my grandmother's dying wishes and my legal ownership. They had effectively signed their own warrants. I minimized the forged documents and opened the background dossiers Vance had compiled on Traven and Desmond. If I was going to utterly dismantle them, I needed to understand the exact mechanics of their desperation. The puzzle pieces were sitting right in front of me, and it was time to connect the dots. I opened Trayvon's file first. At dinner, he had practically shouted about his $2 million seed round for his groundbreaking cryptocurrency startup. The financial reality displayed on my screen told a drastically different story. Trevin's company was a complete illusion. It was a hollow shell game built on hyped-up buzzwords and zero actual revenue. His startup was currently burning through cash at an unsustainable rate just to keep the server hosting fees paid and the rented office space operational. Worse, Vance's report indicated that Trevon was currently under preliminary investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for allegedly commingling investor funds with his personal accounts. The $2 million seed round he had bragged about was a total fabrication. He had actually lost his primary investors 3 weeks ago. Trayvon was drowning. He needed a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately to avoid catastrophic legal trouble and keep up his flashy billionaire persona for Chloe. $300,000 would have given him just enough runway to quiet his angry creditors and keep the scam alive a little longer. I closed Trayvon's file and opened Desmond's dossier. My father had always been obsessed with status, projecting an image of old money power while secretly swimming in high-interest debt. For the past 6 months, he had been aggressively lobbying for a highly coveted regional vice president position at his corporate real estate brokerage. But executive promotions in his specific firm were not based solely on merit. They operated on a buy-in structure. To reach the vice president level and secure a percentage of the regional profits, an executive had to bring a significant capital investment to the table. Desmond needed to write a massive check to the firm's holding company to secure his new title and the prestige that came with it. His credit was completely maxed out. His bank accounts were stretched to the absolute limit, maintaining his tailored suits and expensive country club memberships. He was desperate to buy his way into the upper echelon of corporate power, but he lacked the liquid funds to do so. The realization hit me with crystal clarity. Desmond and Trayvon were both drowning in their own illusions of grandeur. Chloe desperately wanted her lavish Hamptons wedding to maintain her status as the perfect successful daughter. They were all entirely willing to steal my inheritance to fund their fake lives. They were ready to risk my grandmother's home to save themselves. I locked the tablet and stared out the window into the passing city lights. The dots were connected. The picture was complete. I leaned back into the plush leather of the Maybach seat, closing my eyes as the master plan formed in my mind. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception and theft. I was going to gladly oblige them. The Maybach glided to a smooth halt in front of a towering glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. My driver opened the door, and I stepped out into the crisp midnight air. I bypassed the main lobby desk entirely, walking straight toward the private biometric elevator reserved exclusively for the top floor. The steel doors slid shut, securing my ascent to the nerve center of my empire. My family genuinely believed I was a struggling administrative contractor scraping by on side hustles and pitiful wages. They had spent years mocking my very quiet lifestyle, assuming my lack of flashy designer logos meant a lack of ambition. In reality, I was the founder and sole owner of Obsidian Holdings, a ruthless venture capital firm specializing in the aggressive acquisition and liquidation of distressed corporate assets. We did not build startups, we devoured them. We bought out failing companies, stripped them down to their absolute core, and either swallowed their valuable intellectual property or sold off their remains to the highest bidder. The elevator chimed softly, opening directly into my penthouse corporate suite. The office was a temple of modern power, designed in polished black marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. Even at this late hour, my night operations team was buzzing with silent efficiency. Analysts and senior acquisition specialists moved rapidly between sleek, minimalist workstations, monitoring global markets and evaluating hostile takeover targets across 3 different time zones. I walked past them without a single word, heading straight for my private office at the end of the corridor. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into my personal war room. The entire back wall consisted of massive digital monitors displaying real-time data streams, global financial indexes, and intricate webs of corporate ownership structures. I dropped my clutch onto my expansive glass desk and stood before the glowing screens, letting the cool blue light wash over my face. My family had mistaken my silence for weakness. They mistook my refusal to participate in their petty financial posturing as a sign of defeat. But a predator does not need to roar to prove it is dangerous. A true apex predator moves in absolute silence until it is time to strike. I pressed a button on my intercom, summoning my executive acquisitions team to the war room immediately. It was time to shift our massive corporate resources away from international targets and focus entirely on a microscopic local threat. I was about to weaponize billions of dollars in liquid capital against the three people who thought they could outsmart me. The monitors hummed with endless streams of data waiting for my exact command. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar exhilarating rush of adrenaline that always preceded a major corporate kill. They wanted to steal my grandmother's legacy for a miserable few $100,000 to fund their pathetic illusions. I was going to teach them the true meaning of financial devastation and absolute ruin. My acquisitions director, Marcus, entered the room followed by two financial analysts. They carried encrypted tablets and wore expressions of absolute focus, knowing a late-night summons meant a high-priority objective. I turned away from the monitors and faced them, resting my hands against the cool glass of my desk. Pull up everything we have on a cryptocurrency startup registered under the name of Trayvon Vance. I ordered, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. I want a complete and total forensic teardown of his corporate structure, his funding rounds, and his personal liability. Marcus nodded, and his fingers flew across his tablet. Within seconds, the center monitor on the wall shifted from global market trends to a detailed breakdown of Trayvon's supposed business empire. The results were worse than I could have ever anticipated. As the data populated the screen, the analysts began highlighting massive discrepancies in his financial reporting. Trayvon's startup was not a functioning technology company. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme operating on borrowed time and stolen funds. He had been taking capital from new investors to pay off the exorbitant returns he promised to his initial backers. There was no $2 million seed round. Instead, the monitor displayed a terrifying web of high-interest loans, defaulted credit lines, and aggressive demands from extremely dangerous private creditors. Trayvon was currently leveraged to the point of imminent catastrophic bankruptcy. He owed nearly $5 million to people who did not use lawyers to collect their debts. He was using the forged equity from my grandmother Brownstone as a desperate final lifeline to keep his aggressive creditors at bay, just long enough to orchestrate a clean getaway. He was a cornered animal trying to sacrifice my family legacy to save his own skin. A cold, ruthless smile slowly spread across my face as I absorbed the magnitude of his absolute vulnerability. He had paraded his fake gold card around that expensive steakhouse, mocking my career while secretly drowning in an ocean of toxic debt. He thought he was untouchable simply because he had convinced my gullible sister and foolish father that he was a financial genius. He was a fraud, and I was holding the needle to pop his fragile balloon. I turned to Marcus, who was staring at the disastrous financial data with professional disgust. I do not want to just expose him, I instructed my team, my voice dropping to a calm, deadly register. I want to own him completely, contact his private creditors immediately, offer them a premium buyout on every single outstanding loan he currently holds, pay whatever premium is required to expedite the transfer of those notes, buy his debt, all of it. I want to be his sole creditor by Friday morning. Marcus looked up, a fierce, predatory gleam matching my own. We will begin the acquisitions immediately, he confirmed. By the time Trayvon wakes up at the end of the week, his entire existence will belong exclusively to you. With Trayvon imminent destruction fully set into motion, I shifted my attention to the next target on my list. Leave Trayvon file active, but clear the secondary monitor, I commanded. Pull up the corporate profile for Vanguard Realty Group. This was the mid-tier real estate conglomerate where my father Desmond currently worked as a senior director. This was the very company where he was desperately trying to purchase a regional vice president promotion using the stolen equity from my grandmother's house. The screens shifted instantly, replacing Trayvon's disastrous financials with a comprehensive overview of Desmond's employer. Vanguard Realty Group was a moderately successful firm with a decent portfolio of commercial properties across the East Coast, but they were currently facing significant liquidity issues due to recent market fluctuations. They were exactly the kind of vulnerable, stagnant company that my firm specialized in acquiring and dismantling. Desmond believed that securing his promotion within this mediocre company would finally validate his lifelong obsession with wealth and status. He was willing to commit federal fraud to sit at their executive table. I stared at the corporate hierarchy chart displayed on the glowing monitor, locating my father name buried in the middle management tier. He had spent his entire life trying to project an image of supreme authority, looking down on me because I refused to participate in his shallow materialistic games. He thought he could steal from me to buy his way into a crumbling corporate kingdom. He was about to learn a devastating lesson about real, unadulterated power. I traced a finger over the Vanguard Realty logo on the screen. "Do not just stop the fraudulent mortgage transaction," I told my team, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I want to initiate a highly aggressive hostile takeover of their entire parent company. Begin buying up their outstanding public shares through our anonymous shell corporations starting at market open. I want a controlling interest secured within 72 hours. The analysts nodded furiously, tapping commands into their tablets to initiate the massive capital deployment. They knew better than to question the sudden aggressive move. When I targeted a company, their only option was absolute surrender. I was not simply going to block Desmond and Chloe from stealing my brownstone. That was far too easy, and it lacked the necessary punitive impact. I was going to orchestrate a scenario where Desmond walked into his office expecting a glorious promotion, only to discover that his entire corporate reality had shifted overnight. I was going to own the very ground he walked on. I would control his firm, his career, and his entire future. My family had pushed me into a corner, assuming I would quietly accept their abuse and financial theft. They had fundamentally misunderstood the woman I had become. The war room hummed with the sound of billions of dollars moving rapidly across digital networks, executing my commands with flawless precision. I watched the monitors as my traps were set perfectly into place. My private cell phone vibrated again against the thick glass surface of my desk. I glanced down and saw Chloe's name flashing on the screen. The timing of this incoming call was almost poetic. I picked up the phone and accepted the call, letting the heavy silence stretch for a fraction of a second before speaking. "Hello, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly smooth and completely devoid of the predatory anticipation coursing fiercely through my veins. "Aaliyah, oh my goodness, it is so good to hear your voice," she began, her tone dripping with a sickeningly sweet, artificial warmth that immediately set my teeth on edge. "We barely got to really talk at the steakhouse tonight. I wanted to catch up with you properly." I remained entirely silent, letting her fill the empty void. Her act was incredibly transparent to me. She never called me simply to catch up like this. I knew exactly why she was reaching out right now. The fraudulent paperwork they submitted required a secondary verbal verification from the supposed property owner, and they needed me entirely oblivious and compliant. "Listen, Aaliyah." Chloe continued, her voice shifting into a practiced, casual rhythm. "Desmond and I were talking after you left the restaurant. We were thinking about grandmother legacy and how much that old brownstone meant to her. She would have wanted it to stay in the family and actually generate real value. Trevon is expanding his startup exponentially, and he desperately needs a prestigious physical location for his new corporate headquarters. Dad thinks it would be best if you just officially signed the property over to us. It is for the family legacy after all. Trevon will transform that dusty old building into a massive tech hub, and you will not have to worry about the heavy maintenance costs anymore. It is really a win for absolutely everyone." I stared at the digital readout on my monitor, tracking the massive acquisition of Trevon toxic debt currently processing through my corporate shell companies. The absolute unmitigated audacity of her ridiculous request was truly breathtaking. She was calling to casually ask me to hand over a multi-million-dollar historic estate to her broke, fraudulent fiancé under the guise of family unity, while actively attempting to steal it behind my back anyway. She wanted me to surrender the deed willingly, so they would not have to rely solely on their forged documents. They desperately wanted the theft to appear completely legitimate. They wanted me to just roll over and happily hand them the keys to my only cherished inheritance. I listened to her breathe through the receiver, waiting for my immediate and complete compliance. She honestly believed her sweet tone and manipulative reasoning would easily sway my decision. She thought I was the same quiet, submissive sister she had ruthlessly bullied throughout our entire childhood. She had zero concept of the corporate slaughterhouse I operated on a daily basis. I just let her hold her breath and silently wait. I took a slow breath, deliberately keeping my tone perfectly neutral as I responded to her ridiculous demand. "If you honestly think you can handle grandmother legacy, then do what you have to do," I said. My words were carefully chosen, offering no actual resistance, but providing zero legal confirmation of her request. I did not agree to sign anything, nor did I give her verbal permission to take the house. I simply acknowledged her ambition. Chloe, however, was far too eager and arrogant to notice the semantic trap I had just laid out for her. "Oh, Aaliyah, that is so incredibly generous of you," she squealed, her voice pitching upward in fake delight. "I knew you would understand once I explained the grand vision. Trevon is going to be so thrilled when I tell him the good news. This is going to elevate his entire company to the next corporate level. We will take amazing care of the property, I absolutely promise you. You will not even recognize the place once we are finished remodeling the interior." "I am sure I will not," I replied softly, my eyes tracking a green progress bar on my center monitor. The indicator confirmed that our aggressive buyout of Trayvon's largest private loan had just been successfully finalized. His most dangerous creditors were now officially receiving massive wire transfers from Obsidian Holdings. He owed me now. "I am so glad we had this little chat." Chloe continued, entirely oblivious to the lethal snare that was rapidly closing around her ankle. "I have to go start planning the new office layout, but I will call you later this week to arrange a quick lunch. We can discuss the registry then, too." "Sounds fine," I lied effortlessly. "Goodbye, Chloe." I ended the call and tossed the phone back onto my desk. A cold, harsh laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the cavernous space of my war room. She actually thought she had just won. She firmly believed she had successfully manipulated me into surrendering a property worth millions without a single legal fight. In her shallow mind, the historic brownstone was already completely hers. She had no idea that her phone call was nothing more than a pathetic confirmation of her own impending doom. By acting compliant, I had ensured she would not panic and attempt to withdraw the fraudulent mortgage application. She would let the paperwork proceed straight into the waiting hands of my security team and legal department. Every step she took forward was a step deeper into the quicksand. I wanted them to feel the absolute peak of arrogant victory before I tore the ground out from under them. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who was watching me with a look of quiet respect. "Keep buying the debt," I instructed him, my voice hardening into a blade. "Do not stop until we control every single financial obligation attached to his miserable name." "I want to own the air he breathes." Within the hour, my intelligence analyst pulled up Chloe's latest activity on her public social media accounts. She wasted absolutely no time accelerating her own destruction. She had already posted a stylized photo of herself standing confidently on the sidewalk directly in front of my grandmother's historic Brooklyn brownstone. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in delusion. "Touring the new corporate headquarters for my future husband tech empire," she wrote, her words punctuated by champagne glass emojis. "So incredibly blessed to keep this beautiful legacy property in the family and build our massive future together. Next stop, planning the ultimate luxury wedding of the century." The comment section was already flooded with congratulations from her shallow circle of friends, validating her fraudulent reality. I stared at her smiling face on the giant screen, feeling a thrill of anticipation. She was publicly documenting her connection to a property she was actively attempting to steal. She was bragging about a luxury wedding that was entirely contingent on a predatory loan that my security team had already intercepted. She was happily handing me all the digital rope I would ever need to hang her in a federal courtroom. I minimized the social media feed as a heavy stack of legal documents was brought into the war room by my lead corporate counsel. The paperwork detailed the complete and total acquisition of Trevin's entire debt portfolio. My firm had successfully purchased every outstanding promissory note, every defaulted line of credit, and every high-interest loan he had taken out from private lenders. I picked up my gold fountain pen and began signing my name across the bottom of each page. With every stroke of ink, I was legally binding Trayvon's financial existence directly to me. Obsidian Holdings was now his sole controlling creditor. I owned the massive debts he could not possibly pay, and I had the absolute legal authority to seize his assets, demand immediate repayment in full, and force his fraudulent startup into involuntary bankruptcy the second he defaulted. The trap was now officially set and locked into place. I signed the final transfer document and handed the thick stack of papers back to my lead counsel. Execute the hostile takeover of Vanguard Realty Group immediately, I commanded, my eyes sweeping across the fiercely dedicated members of my acquisitions team. Continue buying their shares aggressively through the anonymous shells. I want Desmond Corporate Sanctuary completely under my control by the end of the week. They want to steal from a predator, so they will suffer the consequences of entering my territory. I stood alone in the center of the completely silent war room, watching the glowing monitors as the digital transactions finalized. My family had spent years underestimating me, treating me like a pathetic footnote in their arrogant lives. They were about to step right into a financial bloodbath of my own design. They were happily planning a wedding and a promotion, but I was meticulously planning an absolute massacre. The following morning, the corporate world of Manhattan awoke to its usual chaotic hum, but my focus remained laser-targeted on the impending destruction of my family illusions. My intelligence team intercepted a mass email dispatched from the executive board of Vanguard Realty Group. It was the official announcement for their highly anticipated annual corporate gala. This was not merely a company dinner. It was the most prestigious networking event of the fiscal year, held exclusively at the Vanguard, which stood uncontested as Manhattan's most elite luxury hotel. The Vanguard was a towering palace of gilded ceilings, imported marble, and impossible exclusivity. For Desmond, this gala was the absolute pinnacle of his entire shallow existence. My analysts tapped into his internal corporate communications, revealing his frantic preparations. Desmond was utterly convinced that the board of directors intended to officially crown him as the new regional vice president during the keynote address of the evening. He had already ordered a custom-tailored tuxedo and was leaking arrogant hints to his colleagues about his impending elevation to the executive suite. He truly believed his fabricated capital investment, funded by the stolen equity of my grandmother Brownstone, had successfully bought his seat at the table. He was parading around his office, acting like a reigning monarch, completely unaware that my firm was currently dismantling the very foundation of his parent company. Chloe was equally obsessed with the upcoming gala. My surveillance net caught her boasting on her agency public relations blog about securing a highly coveted invitation to the event. Her small, struggling PR firm was practically invisible in the Manhattan market, but she viewed the gala as her golden ticket. She planned to corner the hotel management team and aggressively pitch her agency for a massive exclusive public relations contract with the Vanguard. She was telling her few remaining clients that she had insider connections and was guaranteed to land the luxury account by the end of the night. She and Trayvon were viewing the gala as their ultimate society debut. They intended to walk into that ballroom draped in rented designer clothing, projecting the illusion of massive wealth while privately dodging aggressive debt collectors. The sheer arrogance required to attend a high society gala while actively committing federal real estate fraud was staggering. They were treating this event as their coronation. They planned to stand under the crystal chandeliers of the Vanguard, sipping vintage champagne and looking down on everyone else. My security team monitored their digital chatter, watching them meticulously plan their grand entrance and their networking strategies. They were so consumed by their vanity and their desperate need for public validation that they failed to notice the massive corporate storm gathering directly above their heads. They believed the gala would be the glorious beginning of their new wealthy lives. They had no idea it was actually the stage I had selected for their ultimate public execution. 2 days later, a standard courier envelope arrived at the reception desk of my secure penthouse office. Vance brought it to me personally, having already scanned it for security threats. He handed me the thin white envelope with a look of mild disgust. "It came directly from your father's residential address," Vance stated simply. I took the envelope and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. I slid the contents onto my glass desk. It was a single ticket to the Vanguard Realty Group annual gala. But it was not an executive VIP pass or even a standard reserved seating invitation. It was a cheap, mass-printed general guest admission badge. This specific tier of ticket was usually reserved for low-level contractors, junior assistants, and administrative staff. It granted entry to the standing room only sections of the ballroom, ensuring the holder would remain completely segregated from the catered dinner tables and the premium open bars. It was designed to keep the lesser attendees away from the executives. Stuck directly to the center of the cheap laminated badge was a bright yellow sticky note. The handwriting was unmistakably Desmond's. The heavy, aggressive strokes of the pen mirrored his arrogant personality perfectly. I read the short message scrawled across the paper. "Come see what black excellence really looks like. Try not to embarrass us." I stared at the crude, insulting note, feeling a familiar cold sensation spread through my chest. The absolute sheer disrespect was breathtaking. He had deliberately mailed me the lowest possible tier of admission, just to ensure I knew exactly where he believed I belonged in his manufactured social hierarchy. He wanted me to stand in the back of the room, hungry and ignored, while I watched him ascend to his fabricated executive throne. He wanted me to witness his fake glory and feel entirely inadequate. He honestly believed that I would be intimidated by the rented tuxedos and the cheap champagne. He thought I would cower in the presence of his mid-tier real estate colleagues. He was actively inviting me to his coronation so he could publicly humiliate me one final time before casting me aside completely. My father viewed me as nothing more than a pathetic failure who needed to be taught a lesson in hierarchy. He wanted to parade his stolen success right in front of my face. I picked up the sticky note and read the words again. "Come see what black excellence really looks like." He equated excellence with stolen money, rented luxury, and federal forgery. He defined success by the brand of his suit rather than the integrity of his character. He was a hollow, empty man, desperately trying to fill a void with stolen equity. I looked at Vance, who was silently waiting for my reaction. "Leave the ticket on the desk," I told him, my voice steady and devoid of any outward emotion. Vance nodded once and quietly exited my office. I looked back down at the insulting scrap of paper. Desmond wanted me to attend the gala. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. I picked up the cheap admission badge and casually tossed it directly into the stainless steel trash receptacle beside my desk. I had zero use for a general guest pass. I stood up and straightened my tailored suit jacket, turning away from the insulting reminder of my father's arrogance. I walked toward the private conference room adjacent to my main war room. The heavy frosted glass doors slid open automatically as I approached. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed and charged with high-level corporate tension. Sitting across the polished mahogany conference table was Sterling, the current chief executive officer of the Vanguard Hotel Group. Sterling was a seasoned hospitality veteran, a man who had spent decades catering to global billionaires and royalty. Yet as I entered the room, he immediately stood up, projecting absolute deference and profound respect. He looked nervous, smoothing his expensive tie, as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Good afternoon, Aaliyah," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor of genuine awe. I did not bother with pleasantries. I simply looked at the thick, leather-bound portfolio resting on the table between us. "Are the final transfers fully verified?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on him. Sterling swallowed hard and quickly slid the heavy portfolio across the smooth wood surface toward me. He opened the cover to reveal a stack of densely packed legal contracts and financial transfer verifications. "Yes," he confirmed, his tone dropping into a reverent hush. "The acquisition is complete, Aaliyah. Every single regulatory hurdle has been cleared, and the board of directors signed off on the restructuring early this morning. You are officially the majority shareholder and chairwoman of the Vanguard. I looked down at the documents securing my absolute ownership of Manhattan's most elite property. My venture capital firm had been quietly buying up massive blocks of Vanguard Hospitality shares for the past 8 months, strategically masking our aggressive acquisitions behind layers of international shell companies. The current board had been completely blindsided by the hostile takeover, realizing too late that Obsidian Holdings had already acquired a decisive controlling interest. I did not just have a VIP pass to the upcoming real estate gala. I literally owned the entire building where the event was being hosted. I owned the grand ballroom where Desmond expected to be crowned. I owned the catering company that would serve his food. I owned the security teams that guarded the doors. Chloe was desperately hoping to secure a minor public relations contract with the hotel management, completely oblivious to the fact that I was now the ultimate supreme authority over the entire global brand. I picked up my pen and signed the final execution order, cementing my total control over the property. Sterling watched me with a mixture of fear and profound respect. "Prepare the main ballroom for the Vanguard Realty Group event this weekend," I instructed him, my voice chillingly calm. "Let them have their grand party, but ensure that my personal security detail has absolute unrestricted access to the entire floor." Sterling nodded vigorously. "It will be done exactly as you wish, Chairwoman." I closed the portfolio and smiled coldly. The predator was no longer just awake. The predator now owned the entire hunting ground. The night of the Vanguard Realty Group annual gala arrived with a sharp chill in the Manhattan air. My driver steered the Maybach through the dense line of luxury vehicles waiting outside the grand entrance of the Vanguard. Flashbulbs from industry photographers illuminated the night as executives stepped onto the red carpet. I waited patiently in the back seat, allowing the chaos of the arrivals to flow past my tinted windows. I had chosen my attire for the evening with surgical precision. I wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford evening gown in midnight black. It featured sharp architectural lines, a plunging neckline, and absolutely zero embellishments. It was the epitome of weaponized minimalism. There were no sequins, no flashy logos, and no desperate cries for attention. The gown was constructed from silk crepe so flawlessly fitted that it projected an aura of untouchable power. It was the kind of quiet wealth that commanded the room the moment you entered it. My hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, and my only jewelry was a pair of flawless 2-carat diamond studs. I stepped out of the vehicle and immediately felt the shift in energy. The valets and doormen, who were technically my employees, moved with heightened deference the moment their eyes met mine. They had been briefed by Sterling. They knew exactly who I was. I glided through the massive gilded doors and stepped into the sprawling grand lobby of the Vanguard. The space was a breathtaking display of imported Italian marble, towering crystal chandeliers, and dramatic floral arrangements. Tonight it was packed with hundreds of real estate agents, brokers, and corporate climbers, all desperate to network their way up the ladder. I bypassed the main crowd, keeping to the perimeter, as my eyes swept the room for my targets. I spotted them almost immediately near the coat check. The contrast between their loud desperation and the elegant surroundings was jarring. Chloe was wearing an overly flashy, heavily sequined gown that looked like it belonged in a cheap pageant rather than a high society gala. The fabric caught the chandelier light in a harsh, blinding way, screaming for validation from every person who walked past. She was clinging to Trayvon's arm, posing for selfies, and acting like she owned the entire city. But Trayvon was falling apart right in front of her. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the thick sheen of sweat coating his forehead. His complexion was pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the lobby, as if he expected federal agents to tackle him to the marble floor. His rented tuxedo jacket looked tight across his shoulders as he repeatedly pulled his cell phone from his pocket. The screen illuminated his panicked face every few seconds. He was aggressively ignoring back-to-back phone calls from the numbers he assumed belonged to his dangerous underground creditors. He had zero idea that the person calling to collect his massive debts was currently standing across the lobby, watching his absolute psychological collapse with deep satisfaction. He was suffocating under the weight of the financial trap I had snapped shut around his neck. I took a slow step forward, preparing to navigate around them, when a sharp voice sliced through the ambient noise of the crowded lobby. Patricia spotted me first. My mother had always possessed an uncanny radar for locating me whenever she felt the urge to deliver a fresh insult. She pushed her way through a group of junior executives marching directly toward me with a look of profound disgust plastered across her heavily powdered face. She wore an ostentatious emerald green dress draped in heavy faux fur, acting as if she were the guest of honor rather than the wife of a mid-tier regional director. "You actually came?" she demanded, her tone dripping with genuine disbelief and sheer condescension. She stopped 2 feet away from me, crossing her arms and looking me up and down with a harsh, critical glare. She scanned my sleek black gown, and her upper lip curled into a sneer. "I am standing right here, Patricia," I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. She scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of several people standing nearby. "And you could not even wear something with a little sparkle," she berated me, gesturing wildly toward my pristine designer dress. "Look at your sister over there. That is exactly how a chief executive officer wife dresses. She commands attention. You look like you are attending a funeral, Aaliyah. This is your father, Big Night. He is being named vice president, and you decide to show up looking like a depressed administrative assistant. Try to remember that you are representing our family tonight." I simply absorbed her words, letting her toxic energy wash over me without leaving a single mark. Her desperate need to elevate Chloe by tearing me down was a pathetic strategy I had endured my entire life. She honestly believed that true power was measured by the amount of glitter glued to a piece of fabric. She thought success meant loudly demanding attention from a room full of strangers. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that true power did not need to scream to be recognized. I looked past her shoulder, observing Desmond holding court near the bar, loudly bragging to a group of bored associates. He was drinking cheap champagne and acting as if he had already conquered the world. The entire family was living inside a fragile paper house, and they were actively handing me the matches. Patricia mistook my silence for shame. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Take that ridiculous general admission badge Desmond sent you and go stand in the back near the service doors," she instructed, her tone vicious. "Do not try to speak to any of the board members. Do not try to mingle with the important guests. Just stay out of the way and let your father and your sister enjoy their success. You are lucky we even allowed you to step foot inside this building. If I catch you embarrassing us, I will personally have security throw you out onto the street." The profound irony of her threat was almost too delicious to bear. She was threatening to have me removed from my own property. She was standing in the center of my multi-billion-dollar hotel, lecturing me about my lack of success. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice, defend my outfit, or attempt to justify my presence. Arguing with Patricia was like screaming into a hurricane. It was a complete waste of breath, and I had no intention of depleting my energy on a woman who was hours away from complete social and financial devastation. Instead, I simply smiled. It was a cold, detached smile that caused Patricia to take a slight involuntary step backward. I shifted my gaze away from her angry face and stared directly at Trayvon. His hands were shaking so violently that he nearly dropped his phone as another call from my collections department lit up his screen. His fake confidence was entirely gone, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a man who knew his fraudulent empire was crumbling to dust. Beside him, Chloe continued to pose and preen, completely oblivious to the fact that her future husband was entirely owned by the sister she despised. I looked back at Patricia, holding her gaze with predatory stillness. "Have a wonderful evening, Patricia," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly polite. "I am sure tonight will be an event this family will never forget." Without waiting for her response, I turned my back on her. I did not head toward the massive general guest line that stretched all the way around the perimeter of the lobby. Hundreds of low-level employees and contractors were shuffling forward, clutching the same cheap laminated badges Desmond had mailed to my office. They were waiting to be herded through the metal detectors and corralled into the standing room-only sections of the back hall. I bypassed that line entirely. I walked with absolute purpose, my designer heels clicking sharply against my Italian marble floors. My trajectory was locked on the opposite side of the lobby. I walked directly toward the velvet-roped VIP check-in area. This entrance was completely isolated from the main crowd, bordered by thick brass stanchions and guarded by four massive men in tailored black suits. It was the exclusive gateway reserved only for Vanguard corporate board members, elite investors, and international dignitaries. I could feel Patricia staring at my back. I could hear Chloe and Desmond stopping their conversations to watch me. They expected me to get forcefully rejected. They were waiting for the security guards to physically block my path, laugh at my lack of credentials, and send me back to the general admission cattle call where they firmly believed I belonged. They were practically holding their breath, anticipating my absolute public humiliation. They wanted to watch me fail. I did not slow my pace as I approached the heavy velvet ropes. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. The lead security guard saw me approaching and instantly unclipped the velvet rope. He did not ask for my name. He did not ask to see a ticket. He simply stepped aside and bowed his head in a gesture of profound professional respect. The trap was sprung. I stepped past the heavy velvet rope, my heels sinking slightly into the plush crimson carpet that marked the VIP threshold. The air here was different, carrying the faint scent of expensive orchids and unyielding corporate wealth. Before I could even reach the polished mahogany check-in desk, my father decided to make his grand move. He broke away from his group of sycophants and power walked across the expansive lobby, his face flushed with a volatile mixture of anger and acute embarrassment. He intercepted me just inches from the front desk, physically blocking my path. He actually positioned his large body between me and the reception staff, acting like a bouncer trying to protect the sanctity of his corporate masters. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Aaliyah?" He hissed, his voice low and vibrating with furious indignation. He kept his tone hushed to avoid drawing the attention of the real power players in the room, but his eyes were wide with panic. "I explicitly told you to go to the general admission line right now. This area is strictly for executive leadership and top-tier investors. You are going to completely humiliate me before the board of directors even arrives." He reached up and aggressively tapped the laminated identification badge clipped to the lapel of his rented tuxedo. The badge clearly designated him as a senior director, a mid-level management title he paraded around as if he had founded the entire real estate industry. "Look at this badge," he demanded, pointing a thick finger at the plastic square. "This grants me access to this line. I earned this prestigious position through decades of hard work and absolute loyalty to Vanguard Realty Group. You cannot just stroll up here in a fancy black dress and expect to bypass the rules like you own the place. Security is going to drag you out of here and I will not lift a single finger to stop them. Go to the back of the room where you belong right now." He was practically vibrating with toxic arrogance. He truly believed his flimsy plastic badge gave him authority over me. He thought the corporate hierarchy of his stagnant company was the absolute law of the universe. He failed to comprehend that I did not work within his hierarchy. I owned it lock, stock, and barrel. I looked at his red face, his sweating brow, and his pathetic, desperate need to feel important. I did not say a single word to him. I did not defend my presence or explain my actions. I simply looked at him with cold, unblinking detachment until he nervously shifted his weight under my piercing gaze. I stepped neatly around his blocking maneuver, moving past him as if he were nothing more than a piece of mildly inconvenient furniture placed in my path. I approached the glowing check-in terminal, leaving him sputtering in absolute shock behind me. The VIP reception desk was manned by a highly polished young woman wearing a sleek Vanguard uniform. She looked up as I approached, her professional smile firmly in place, though her eyes darted nervously toward my father, who was currently marching up behind me, preparing to cause a massive scene. "May I see your executive invitation, ma'am?" she asked politely, holding out a silver digital scanning device. Desmond arrived at my shoulder, breathing heavily and radiating pure anxiety. "She does not have one," he announced loudly, attempting to take control of the situation and salvage his fragile ego. "I apologize for the disruption, miss." She is my daughter. She came through the wrong entrance, and I am personally escorting her back to the general admission hall. Do not bother calling security. I reached into my small clutch and retrieved my mobile device, completely ignoring his frantic rambling. I tapped the screen once, bringing up the heavily encrypted digital access code my security director had generated for me earlier that afternoon. I held the bright screen forward, presenting the complex geometric barcode to the receptionist. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting between my father commanding presence and my terrifying stillness. She finally raised the silver scanner and pointed a red laser directly at my phone screen. The device emitted a sharp, loud beep that cut clearly through the ambient noise of the crowded lobby. Instantly, the large, flat-screen monitor mounted behind the reception desk reacted. The display initially flashed a stark warning red, causing Desmond to let out a short, triumphant laugh. "I told you," he sneered, reaching out to grab my bare arm. "You are completely locked out." Locked. "Let us go before you ruin my entire career." But his hand never touched my arm. The warning red on the monitor suddenly vanished, replaced by a blinding display of solid, brilliant gold. The golden light washed over the entire reception area, illuminating my face and casting long, dark shadows behind my father. The digital interface on the scanner in the receptionist's hand locked, freezing all other check-in protocols across the hotel network. The young woman stared at the golden screen, her professional smile completely dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw slightly dropped and her hands began to tremble violently. She looked from the glowing gold monitor back to my face, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and profound awe. The system did not just verify my entry. The system recognized the ultimate override command, designating the supreme owner of the network. In the digital architecture of the Vanguard Hotel Group, the solid gold screen was a mythical protocol reserved exclusively for the majority shareholder. It signaled that the top of the food chain had just entered the building. The receptionist knew exactly what that golden light meant. She was standing face to face with the ruthless phantom billionaire who had just violently consumed her employer in a hostile takeover. She tried to speak, but her voice completely failed her. She simply stood there, frozen in panic. Desmond stared at the golden screen, his sneer fading into profound confusion. The halt at the VIP desk caused a ripple across the lobby. The silence caught the attention of the executive staff. Before Desmond could demand an explanation, the crowd of executives suddenly parted. Sterling, the chief executive officer, emerged, walking at a frantic pace. He was flanked by his senior management team. Desmond saw the CEO approaching and his chest puffed out instantly. He smoothed his lapels and stepped forward, blocking my position once again. He believed the CEO was rushing over to personally welcome him. Desmond plastered on his charming corporate smile and aggressively thrust his hand out toward the executive. "Sterling." "Sir, what an absolute honor!" Desmond boomed, his voice loud enough to ensure Chloe and Trayvon heard him from the coat check area. "I was just heading inside. We have so much to discuss regarding my new role." Sterling did not even look at him. He did not slow down. He did not acknowledge the outstretched hand or the booming greeting. Sterling completely ignored my father, walking right past him with such force that Desmond was physically brushed aside by the senior management team. Desmond stumbled backward, his hand still awkwardly suspended in the air, his smile shattering into a million pieces. Sterling stopped directly in front of me, breathing heavily from his rapid sprint across the massive lobby. The most powerful hospitality executive in Manhattan, a man who regularly intimidated politicians and global investors, clasped his hands tightly in front of him. He slowly lowered his head, bending deeply at the waist, in a gesture of absolute total submission. It was not a polite nod. It was a full, reverent bow. Chairwoman Sterling announced, his voice echoing clearly through the sudden dead silence of the VIP check-in area. "We are profoundly honored by your presence tonight. We have prepared the executive glass suite overlooking the main ballroom exclusively for you. Your security team is already stationed at the perimeter. Please let me know if there is absolutely anything else you require." The entire lobby seemed to stop breathing. The heavy silence was absolute. I looked past Sterling, bowed head, and locked eyes with my family. Desmond was standing frozen, his arms still raised, his face completely drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire reality crumble into dust. Near the coat check, Chloe dropped her expensive clutch onto the marble floor, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet room. Her mouth was open in a silent scream of pure shock. Traven stood beside her looking physically ill, his eyes darting between my flawless designer gown and the CEO currently bowing at my feet. They were completely paralyzed. The air had literally left their lungs. They had come here tonight to mock a pathetic failure. Instead, they were forced to witness the terrifying coronation of a queen. I did not revel in the shocked silence, nor did I offer a single word of explanation to the three statues standing in the lobby. The display of absolute submission from the chief executive officer was all the context they required. I looked down at Sterling, who remained bowed in quiet reverence. "Rise, Sterling." I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy air with crisp authority. He immediately straightened, adjusting his suit jacket with a sharp professional motion. I do not wish to cause a public spectacle in the main reception area. I continued, keeping my gaze fixed entirely on the terrified faces of my father, my sister, and her fraudulent fiancé. "Bring my family to my suite immediately. We have urgent private business to discuss before the keynote address begins." Sterling nodded sharply and gestured toward his earpiece. Within seconds, 4 massive men clad in identical black suits materialized from the shadows of the lobby. These were not standard hotel bouncers. This was my personal private security detail operating with flawless military precision. "Escort them to the executive glass boardroom," Sterling commanded, pointing directly at Desmond, Chloe, and Trevon. "Do not let them leave the premises." Desmond finally snapped out of his stunned paralysis. He puffed out his chest, attempting to muster his usual blustering authority. "Now see here, Sterling. There has been a massive mistake," he sputtered, stepping forward. "You do not understand who she is. I am the senior director of Vanguard." One of the security guards stepped smoothly into Desmond's path, placing a massive hand firmly against my father's chest. The physical contact instantly halted his forward momentum. "You are currently a guest in the Chairwoman Hotel," the guard stated, his voice rumbling like a low engine. "You will comply with her request or you will be physically removed." Desmond looked down at the hand on his chest, then back up at my entirely unbothered face. The reality of the power dynamic finally penetrated his thick skull. The arrogant bluster evaporated from his expression, leaving behind nothing but pale, naked fear. Beside him, Chloe was hyperventilating, her sequined dress catching the light as she trembled. Treven looked like he was about to vomit directly onto the imported marble floor. "Walk," I commanded them. I turned and strode toward the private biometric elevator reserved exclusively for top-tier ownership. The security detail immediately flanked my family, corralling them forward like cattle being led to the slaughterhouse. The polished steel doors slid open and we all stepped inside. The ascent to the penthouse level was suffocatingly silent. Nobody dared to speak. The only sound was Trevon, heavy, panicked breathing. The elevator chimed softly, opening directly into my private glass-walled boardroom. The space was breathtaking. It was suspended directly above the main ballroom, offering a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering gala happening below. The thousands of attendees looked like tiny ants scrambling for position. I walked to the head of the massive obsidian conference table and took my seat. My guards positioned themselves at the exit, locking the heavy oak doors with a resounding mechanical click. My family stood awkwardly. They were trapped inside a luxurious glass cage suspended high above the world they wanted to conquer. "Sit down," I ordered. They followed me, slowly shuffling toward the opposite end of the long table like condemned prisoners approaching the gallows. My assistant Marcus was already waiting inside the suite, standing rigidly beside my chair. He handed me a massive leather-bound binder containing the absolute entirety of Trevon's miserable financial existence. I took the heavy binder and dropped it onto the glass surface. The sharp, loud crack made Chloe physically flinch. I did not even look at her. My eyes were locked entirely on the sweating, shivering man standing next to her. "Sit down, Trayvon," I commanded, pointing to the empty seat across from me. He collapsed into the leather chair, his knees practically giving out beneath him. I opened the binder and slowly turned the first crisp page. "Let us talk about that highly publicized $2 million seed round your technology startup supposedly secured last month," I said, my voice echoing coldly against the glass walls. "The funding you claimed made you an elite entrepreneur. It is a complete fabrication. You do not run a legitimate cryptocurrency company, Trayvon. You are operating a textbook Ponzi scheme. You are shuffling money from new victims to pay off your initial backers, keeping up the pathetic illusion of massive exponential growth." Trayvon's face morphed from pale white to a sickly shade of gray. "I do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "My financials are totally solid. You are just trying to ruin me because you hate Chloe." I ignored his weak deflection, turning to the next page in the extensive dossier. "You also currently owe exactly $500,000 to extremely dangerous shadow lenders operating out of the tri-state area." I continued reading the terrifying numbers aloud with forensic precision. "You borrowed toxic capital at predatory interest rates just to fund your ridiculous lifestyle, your designer clothes, and that massive diamond ring you bought my greedy sister. You are drowning in toxic debt, and you intended to forge the deed to my grandmother's historic brownstone, specifically to use the property equity as collateral to save your own miserable skin." "That is a complete lie!" Trayvon shouted, suddenly slamming his shaking fist down onto the table in a desperate attempt to retain control. "You have absolutely no proof of any of this. I hold the floor, Trayvon." I snapped, my voice striking him like a physical whip. "You will shut your mouth and you will listen to exactly what I have to say. You are nothing but a pathetic con artist who picked the wrong family to target. You thought you could steal my heritage and use it to wipe away your disgusting financial crimes. You played a dangerous game, and now you have entirely lost." I closed the binder, sliding it slowly across the polished glass directly toward him. The silence returning to the room was absolutely deafening as he stared down at his undeniable ultimate financial destruction sealed inside. "You have been terrified all week," I said, leaning forward slightly, bridging the distance across the massive table. "You thought you were cleverly dodging endless furious phone calls from angry underground loan sharks and merciless creditors. You were completely wrong. You were actually dodging mine." Trayvon flinched as if he had been physically struck, his eyes darting wildly around the locked glass room, looking for an escape that did not exist. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his voice completely hollow. "My venture capital firm, Obsidian Holdings, bought your toxic debt for pennies on the dollar," I stated, watching the realization slowly register in his terrified eyes. "I acquired every single outstanding loan, every defaulted credit line, and every single penalty fee you have ever accrued. I am your sole controlling creditor now. I own your startup. I own your fraudulent corporate accounts. I own you, Trayvon. You are completely and unequivocally bankrupt, and I am officially seizing all of your assets tonight." He stared at me with a blank, uncomprehending expression, his brain short-circuiting under the massive weight of his absolute failure. Beside him, Chloe let out a sharp, ragged gasp, covering her mouth with both trembling hands, as her fake diamond engagement ring caught the ambient light. "No," Trayvon gasped, shaking his head in aggressive denial. "You cannot do this to me. We are family. We are going to be family. Family does not forge federal real estate documents to steal an ancestral home." I shot back, my tone merciless. "You thought I was a gullible, weak sister you could easily manipulate and discard. You completely misjudged your prey." The finality of my words crushed the last remaining fragments of his pathetic resistance. Trayvon slumped violently forward in his leather chair, burying his sweating face deep into his shaking hands. A low, miserable sob tore through his throat, echoing pitifully in the pristine executive boardroom. He began weeping uncontrollably, the loud, wet sounds of his total ruination filling the tense silence. His rented tuxedo heaved with every agonizing breath as his grand illusions of wealth and power evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the terrifying reality of prison and poverty. I watched him cry without feeling a single drop of sympathy. He had brought this brutal fate entirely upon himself. Chloe stared at her broken fiancé, her sequined dress suddenly looking incredibly cheap against the backdrop of my genuine empire. Desmond stood frozen in the corner, his face pale and contorted with silent mounting horror as he finally witnessed the absolute devastating magnitude of my true power. The bloodbath had just officially begun, and I was going to make absolutely sure that he felt every single ounce of the crushing humiliation he had so casually subjected me to for my entire miserable childhood under his extremely toxic and deeply suffocating roof tonight, taking his stolen crown permanently away from his undeserving head forever and leaving him with absolutely nothing but cold, bitter ashes inside his shaking hands. The silence in the glass room shattered the instant the full weight of my words finally penetrated the dense layers of Chloe's desperate delusion. She ripped her gaze away from her weeping fiancé and whipped her head toward me, her heavily contoured face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You are lying!" she screamed, her shrill voice bouncing violently off the soundproof glass walls. She lunged forward, slamming her hands palms down onto the polished obsidian table. Her cheap, sequined gown caught the ambient light from the chandelier above, casting jagged, fractured reflections across the room. "You are completely lying, Aaliyah. You are just jealous because I am the one getting married to a successful man, while you sit alone in your miserable, empty life. Trevon is a visionary entrepreneur. You could never understand his genius because you are nothing but a bitter, spiteful outcast." She spun around and grabbed Trayvon by the shoulders of his rented tuxedo, attempting to physically haul him upward from his pathetic, slumped position. "Get up, Trayvon," she commanded, shaking him aggressively. "Tell her she is insane. Tell her your company is fine." But Trevon remained a dead weight, weeping pathetically into his palms, entirely incapable of maintaining the charade for even one more second. Chloe let go of him, her chest heaving as she turned her furious glare back to me. Her desperation was a palpable living thing filling the room with the sour stench of panic. "I do not care what kind of fake paperwork you brought here tonight," she spat, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "I do not care about your stupid venture capital firm or your ridiculous threats. You cannot touch us. I am untouchable." She tossed her hair over her shoulder, puffing out her chest in a desperate attempt to project the authority she completely lacked. "I am signing a massive, exclusive public relations contract with the Vanguard Realty Group tonight. Do you hear me, Aaliyah? This entire gala is basically my welcoming party. My agency is going to be representing the biggest hospitality brand in the world. They are paying me a 7-figure retainer. I will take that signing bonus, and I will pay off whatever imaginary debts you think Trayvon owes you by tomorrow morning. We do not need you. We do not need your money. I am going to be the most powerful publicist in Manhattan, and you are going to be nothing." She was panting by the time she finished her ridiculous tirade, genuinely believing that her fabricated reality could somehow overwrite the absolute financial slaughter I had just orchestrated. She stood there vibrating with manic energy, completely blind to the fact that the very men she claimed were going to make her rich were standing quietly in the shadows of the room, watching her public meltdown with profound corporate disgust. Sterling stepped forward from the perimeter of the room, moving with the quiet, predatory grace of a man who controlled billions of dollars in global assets. He stopped at the edge of the conference table, placing his hands neatly behind his back. "Miss Chloe Sterling," began his deep, baritone voice, slicing through her hysterical breathing with absolute chilling finality. "Vanguard Realty Group does not do business with felons. We demand absolute integrity from every single agency we contract, and your firm falls catastrophically short of our ethical baseline. We have never had any intention of hiring your public relations agency. Your introductory meetings with our lower-level marketing associates were granted purely as a professional courtesy to our chairwoman so she could properly arrange this specific intervention tonight. Your agency is blacklisted across our entire global network, effective immediately." Chloe's mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish pulled abruptly from the ocean. She stared at the chief executive officer of the company she had been bragging about to her friends for months, completely incapable of processing his brutal rejection. Her eyes darted wildly between Sterling and my father, silently begging Desmond to intervene and fix this catastrophic failure. But Desmond remained entirely frozen in the corner, pinned to the wall by his own cowardice and the intimidating presence of my private security detail. He offered her absolutely nothing. I did not give Chloe the opportunity to recover her breath. I reached smoothly into my leather briefcase and withdrew a second thick folder, binding it tightly in my hands before tossing it onto the glass table directly next to Trayvon financial death warrant. This folder did not contain bank statements or venture capital ledgers. I reached out and slowly opened the heavy cover, revealing a stack of high-resolution glossy photographs and dense legal documents printed on premium bonded paper. Let us discuss the real reason you are so desperate for Vanguard money. Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that commanded total silence in the room. You did not just borrow money from loan sharks. You committed federal fraud. I slid the glossy pages across the table until they rested directly under her trembling gaze. This is a comprehensive forensic handwriting analysis conducted by the top independent fraud investigators in the state of New York. They analyzed the signatures on the deed transfer documents you submitted to the county clerk last month. The documents attempting to quietly transfer the title of Grandmother Historic Beacon Hill Brownstone into a newly formed holding company controlled entirely by you and Trayvon. You thought you were so incredibly clever. You thought Grandmother was too old to notice and I was too alienated to care. But the forensic report is completely undeniable. You forged my name. You forged my father's name. You forged Grandmother's signature to steal her ancestral home right out from under her. You forged my name to steal Grandma House, simply to fund this fake wedding and maintain your pathetic illusion of wealth, I said, my voice striking her like a physical blow. You were perfectly willing to leave an elderly woman completely homeless just so you could pay for imported caviar and a designer gown to impress a room full of strangers who do not even care if you exist. You thought your little holding company scheme was foolproof. You thought you could secure a massive loan against the brownstone equity and use the cash to pay off Trayvon dangerous shadow lenders before anyone ever realized the deed had been altered. But you are incredibly stupid, Chloe. You made basic amateur mistakes. The mortgage broker you tried to use for the equity loan flagged the transaction immediately. He noticed the discrepancies in the notarized seals, and he contacted my corporate legal team because my firm holds the primary insurance policy on that estate. The entire transaction was frozen weeks ago, and my attorneys have been quietly compiling this criminal referral ever since. Your public relations agency is completely dead, Chloe. No legitimate corporation will ever hire a woman actively facing federal forgery and grand larceny charges. Your entire professional reputation is absolute garbage as of this very second. And your lavish high society wedding is permanently canceled because your groom is completely broke and heading straight to federal prison alongside you. The absolute finality of my words shattered the last remaining pillars of her fabricated universe. The arrogant sneer vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of primal, overwhelming terror. She looked down at the forensic handwriting analysis, staring at the undeniable proof of her criminal guilt. Her legs gave out completely. She did not stumble or gracefully sit down. She simply collapsed, dropping straight to her knees on the hard floor. Her expensive, heavily sequined designer dress pooled around her in a glittering, useless heap. She knelt on the floor, her hands gripping the edge of the glass table, her knuckles turning stark white as she gasped for air. She looked absolutely pathetic, a shattered, fraudulent princess stripped of her fake crown and forced to kneel in the dirt. Trayvon continued to weep uncontrollably beside her, neither of them capable of offering the other any comfort or defense. I looked down at her, completely devoid of pity or mercy. She had spent my entire life tormenting me, stealing my joy, and attempting to diminish my worth. Now she was on her knees in front of my executive board, ruined by her own insatiable greed and monumental arrogance. The glass room was perfectly quiet except for the ragged, pathetic sounds of their synchronized sobbing. The trap had not just closed around them, it had completely crushed them into dust. Desmond had remained entirely paralyzed in the corner of the glass-walled boardroom, watching the absolute financial destruction of his golden child and her fraudulent fiancé. For several long, agonizing moments, the only sounds permeating the thick, heavy silence were the ragged, gasping sobs of Chloe and Trevon, weeping uncontrollably on the polished floor. But Desmond possessed a towering ego built on decades of untested arrogance and fragile patriarchal delusion. He simply could not comprehend a reality where he was not the absolute center of unyielding authority. The initial suffocating shock that had pinned him silently to the wall slowly morphed into a volatile, blinding rage. He violently smoothed the lapels of his rented tuxedo, attempting to physically reconstruct the shattered remnants of his commanding presence. He stepped away from the glass overlooking the glittering gala, his heavy leather shoes making sharp, aggressive sounds against the floorboards. He deliberately ignored the pathetic, crumpled forms of Chloe and Trayvon stepping directly around his weeping daughter as if she were merely discarded trash in his path. He marched toward my end of the long obsidian table, his face flushing a deep mottled crimson that signaled his impending eruption. He drew in a massive, deep breath, expanding his chest to its maximum capacity, preparing to unleash the booming, authoritative father voice he had used to terrorize and silence me for my entire miserable childhood. "You will stop this right now, Aaliyah," he roared, the sheer, aggressive volume of his voice vibrating violently against the heavy, soundproof glass. His heavy fist slammed down onto the edge of the conference table, shaking the thick leather binder that contained Trayvon's ruined future. He glared down at me, his eyes bulging with a terrifying mixture of sheer desperation and furious indignation. He fully expected me to flinch in terror. He fully expected me to shrink back into my chair and immediately apologize for daring to disrupt his meticulously constructed universe. "I am your father!" he bellowed, his face contorting into an ugly sneer of absolute unearned entitlement. "You do not get to walk into this building and humiliate my family in front of my executive board. You are completely out of your mind if you think you can pull a stunt like this without severe, lasting consequences. I am a respected senior leader in this powerful industry. I am about to be named vice president of my firm tonight in front of thousands of important people. You will show me respect." He stood there, panting heavily, his chest heaving rapidly with the exertion of his own manufactured rage. He truly believed his loud voice and his impending corporate promotion were impenetrable shields that could protect him from the wrath I had brought to his doorstep. He glanced sideways at Sterling, expecting the chief executive officer to immediately intervene and reprimand the insolent woman, threatening his top-tier management staff. But Sterling remained completely silent, his hands clasped respectfully behind his back, entirely unwilling to make eye contact with a man who was already professionally dead. Desmond, isolated and enraged, turned his furious glare back to my face, waiting for my inevitable submission. I did not flinch. I did not shrink back into my heavy leather chair, and I certainly did not offer him a single ounce of the respect he so aggressively demanded. Instead, I placed my hands flat against the cool glass surface of the table and slowly, deliberately stood up. I wore black stiletto heels that pushed my height well past his, elevating me both physically and metaphorically above his pathetic, blustering form. The sudden shift in my posture caused Desmond to involuntarily take a half step backward, his arrogant momentum instantly failing him. I smoothed the front of my flawless black silk gown, projecting an aura of absolute unshakable power that completely consumed all the remaining oxygen in the room. "You aren't being named VP Desmond," I said, my voice dropping to a lethally calm register that chilled the air between us. "You are not receiving a prestigious promotion tonight. You are not receiving a massive financial bonus. You are not walking out onto that brightly lit stage in the grand ballroom to accept the thunderous applause of your peers." Desmond blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as his brain struggled to process the calm, absolute certainty in my words. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his booming voice suddenly cracking under the immense crushing pressure of my unyielding gaze. "Sterling promised me that promotion weeks ago. The board of directors has already formally approved the executive transition." "The board you are so desperately relying on no longer exists," Desmond I stated smoothly. walking slowly around the edge of the long conference table until I was standing mere inches from his trembling form. The Vanguard Realty Group Board of Directors was entirely dissolved and aggressively restructured yesterday morning. Because 3 days ago my holding company finalized a hostile takeover of your real estate firm. I watched the blood drain completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The words hung heavily in the air, striking him with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. I orchestrated a massive, aggressive acquisition strategy, buying up millions of vulnerable shares through offshore shell companies until I secured an absolute supermajority voting bloc. I continued my tone conversational, yet dripping with lethal intent. We completely neutralized your protective corporate provisions and executed a forced buyout that left your previous executive leadership with absolutely no choice but total, unconditional surrender. Sterling kept his position because he proved extremely cooperative during the transition, demonstrating absolute, unwavering loyalty to his new majority shareholder. But you, Desmond, you were never part of my long-term corporate strategy. Your entire career, your prestigious management title, your lavish corner office, everything you hold dear belongs entirely to me. You do not work for Vanguard Realty Group anymore. You work for me. His eyes darted wildly around the locked room, seeking confirmation of this absolute waking nightmare. He looked desperately at Sterling, who simply gave a slow, grim nod, confirming the devastating truth. Desmond's entire reality fractured, his corporate identity shattering into a million sharp, useless pieces on the floor. The profound silence that followed my revelation was absolute, broken only by the continued pathetic whimpering of Chloe and Trayvon in the background. Desmond stood completely paralyzed, unable to formulate a single coherent thought, as the true magnitude of my financial conquest crushed his arrogant spirit. I turned back to my leather briefcase and retrieved one final pristine white envelope. I held it lightly between my fingers before casually tossing it onto the glass table directly in front of him. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped perfectly aligned with his trembling hands. "I am your new boss, Desmond," I announced, my voice carrying the terrible weight of ultimate, undisputed authority. "And my very first official act as the chairwoman of this corporation is firing you. Open the envelope." He stared at the white paper as if it were a venomous snake, but his shaking fingers obeyed my dark command. He tore open the flap and pulled out the single sheet of heavy stock paper. It was a formal termination notice printed on Vanguard letterhead, but bearing my personal corporate seal. He scanned the harsh legal text, his eyes widening in unadulterated terror as he reached the detailed bullet points listed on the second page. "You did not just fail at your job, Desmond," I said, stepping closer until he was forced to look up into my cold, unforgiving eyes. "You actively destroyed your own department." My transition team ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all senior management accounts immediately following the hostile takeover. We found exactly what I expected to find. You embezzled corporate funds to pay for Chloe Lifestyle. We tracked every single fraudulent expense report, every fabricated vendor invoice, and every manipulated budget line item. You diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars from Vanguard operating capital to pay for her designer handbags, her luxury vacations, and the massive deposit on this ridiculous gala tonight. "No," he wheezed, his voice completely devoid of air. "Please, Aaliyah, you cannot do this to me. It was just a temporary loan. I was going to put the money back. I swear I was going to replace every single cent." "You are a common thief, Desmond," I replied, entirely unmoved by his sudden pathetic begging. "You stole from your employers to maintain a pathetic illusion of wealth and success for a daughter who despises you. The termination is effective immediately and entirely without severance, but losing your job is the absolute least of your concerns tonight." The comprehensive forensic audit documenting every single stolen dollar, every manipulated tax record, and every fraudulent wire transfer was immediately forwarded to federal authorities. "The FBI has already received the audit, Desmond. Federal agents are literally waiting in the lobby downstairs right now to take you into permanent federal custody." Desmond's jaw drops completely open, a silent scream trapped deep in his throat. His entire identity, his false wealth, his stolen prestige was entirely obliterated in seconds. He was nothing but a criminal waiting for handcuffs. Desmond's silent screams seemed to finally break the spell holding my mother hostage in the corner of the boardroom. Patricia had remained entirely mute during the systematic dismantling of her golden child and her arrogant husband. She had pressed her back against the glass wall, watching her luxurious reality disintegrate into absolute nothingness. Now the undeniable certainty of federal prison and complete financial ruin finally registered in her perfectly manicured head. A piercing, hysterical wail tore from her throat. It was a dreadful grating sound that grated against the pristine acoustics of the executive suite. She stumbled forward, her expensive diamond earrings swinging wildly as she abandoned the safety of the shadows. She practically threw herself across the length of the polished obsidian table, her heavily beaded evening gown scraping against the glass. Patricia did not reach for Desmond to comfort him, nor did she stoop down to console her weeping daughter Chloe, who remained crumpled on the floor. Instead, she bypassed them entirely and lunged directly toward me. Her desperate, grasping fingers clawed the empty air before she violently grabbed my forearm. Her acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin through the silk sleeve of my gown in a frantic, terrified grip. "Aaliyah, please!" she shrieked, her face completely drenched in hot panic tears that ruined her immaculate professional makeup. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark streams, making her look like a deranged clown. "We are blood. We are family. You cannot destroy us like this. You cannot send your own father to federal prison. You cannot take our home and our money. We will have absolutely nothing left." She shook my arm aggressively, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes that begged for a mercy she had never once shown me. She was hyperventilating, her breath hitching in her chest as she tried to force a connection that had never existed. "You are my daughter, Aaliyah," she sobbed, her voice cracking under the immense weight of her impending poverty. "I gave birth to you. I raised you under my roof. You have made your point. You have proven how powerful you are. You have all the money and all the influence in the world now. Please, just call off the federal agents. Tell Sterling to stop the audit. Let Desmond resign quietly, and let Chloe keep her agency. We will leave you alone forever. We will never ask you for anything again. I promise you, Aaliyah. Just remember that we are your family. Family protects each other. Family forgives. You cannot just erase us from society." She dropped to her knees right beside her favorite daughter, still desperately clinging to my forearm, as if I were a wooden raft in the middle of a raging ocean. Her pathetic begging echoed off the high ceiling, a nauseating display of supreme maternal hypocrisy. She truly believed that invoking the sacred concept of family could miraculously overwrite decades of systemic neglect and emotional abuse. She thought the biological fact of my birth somehow granted her a lifetime pass to exploit me without consequence. I looked down at the weeping, pathetic woman, clinging to my silk sleeve, and felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering warmth, no latent daughterly affection, and certainly no hesitation. I braced my stance and violently pulled my arm away from her frantic grip, tearing my fabric from her clawing acrylic nails. Patricia gasped, falling backward and catching herself heavily on the glass table. She looked up at me in pure shock, as if my physical rejection was entirely incomprehensible to her. "Do not ever touch me again," I commanded, my voice echoing with a cold mechanical detachment that made her physically recoil. "Do not dare invoke the word family in my presence." Where was this profound family loyalty when you sat at the kitchen table and silently watched Desmond drain my entire college savings account just to pay for Chloe's first semester abroad? I asked, stepping forward and forcing her to cower beneath my shadow. Where was your maternal devotion when I was working 3 minimum wage jobs to survive while you were buying Chloe a brand new luxury sedan for barely graduating high school? You stood by and facilitated every single act of cruelty inflicted upon me. You were the silent, complicit architect of my misery. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to fabricate another pathetic excuse, but I instantly silenced her with a sharp, slicing gesture of my hand. Where was your fierce protective instinct when you actively allowed them to forge my name on federal real estate documents? I demanded, my voice rising with lethal authority. You knew exactly what Chloe and Trayvon were planning to do with grandmother ancestral home. You knew they were stealing my heritage to fund this ridiculous fraudulent wedding, and you did absolutely nothing to stop it. You encouraged it. You thought I was weak and isolated, and you assumed I would simply roll over and accept the theft, just like I had accepted every other injustice you forced down my throat. You did not want a daughter, Patricia. I spat out the name, stripping her of her maternal title forever. You wanted a punching bag. You wanted a convenient scapegoat you could blame for every single failure and frustration in your shallow, miserable life. You wanted someone to absorb the toxic fallout of your disastrous marriage and your financial incompetence. You built your entire domestic kingdom on the premise that I would always be beneath you, ready to be kicked whenever you needed to elevate yourselves. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You severely underestimated my intelligence, and you vastly overestimated your own power. You just picked the wrong punching bag. The absolute cold truth of my words struck her with devastating precision. Her sobbing abruptly stopped, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare, as the undeniable reality of her complicity washed over her. She had no defense left. No lies could shield her from the monster she had chosen to be. She was completely, utterly defeated by her own monstrous reflection. I broke eye contact with Patricia, entirely dismissing her existence with a final, indifferent blink. I turned my attention back to the perimeter of the room, where my 4 massive private security guards stood waiting with absolute military stillness. I pointed a single perfectly manicured finger toward the cluster of ruined, weeping figures staining the floor of my executive boardroom. These people are not on the Vanguard Realty Group official guest list. I announced, my voice carrying the crisp, sharp cadence of a commanding corporate executive executing a routine pest removal. They are trespassing on private corporate property. Escort them out of the building immediately. Sterling nodded sharply from the corner, instantly validating my directive. Do not take them down through the main atrium, I added, my tone dropping to a level of icy disdain that made Desmond flinch in horror. I do not want them causing a public scene and ruining the atmosphere for my actual invited guests. Escort them out through the rear industrial service elevator. They do not belong in the lobby. The security team moved with terrifying synchronized efficiency. They advanced on my family like silent predators closing a trap. 2 guards seized Desmond by the upper arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. He shrieked in protest, attempting to thrash against their iron grips, but his pathetic physical resistance was utterly useless against their trained muscle. Do not touch me, he hollered, his face purple with indignant rage. I demand to call my lawyer. I demand a phone call. The guards completely ignored his frantic blustering, dragging his heavy, struggling form toward the rear exit door. A 3rd guard hoisted Trayvon upward by the collar of his rented tuxedo, while the 4th firmly grasped Chloe by the elbow, forcing her upright. Chloe kicked and thrashed, her sequined dress ripping along the seam as she fought the inevitable. You cannot do this to us, Aaliyah, she screamed, her voice tearing her vocal cords in a pitch of absolute feral desperation. We are guests. You are a monster. I will ruin you. Her threats dissolved into incoherent shrieks as the guard physically propelled her toward the hallway. Patricia scrambled to her feet, clutching her ruined designer purse, sobbing uncontrollably as she stumbled after her husband and her golden child. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open, revealing the stark, harsh fluorescent lights of the industrial service corridor. I stood perfectly still at the head of the obsidian table, watching impassively as the 4 people who had tormented me for my entire existence were physically dragged out of my sight. Their cries and screams echoed pitifully down the concrete service hall, mingling with the mechanical hum of the freight elevator. They were being violently expelled into the cold, unforgiving night, entirely stripped of their fake wealth, their stolen dignity, and their fragile, unearned pride. The heavy doors slammed shut with a resounding, definitive click, instantly cutting off their hysterical screaming. The suffocating silence rushed back into the room, clean and pure. Exactly 30 days later, the absolute devastation of my treacherous bloodline was now a matter of public record. The swift and brutal dismantling of their fraudulent lives played out across the front pages of the Financial District daily papers. Desmond was formally indicted on 27 separate federal counts of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and wire tampering. The federal agents had not even waited for him to reach the parking garage that night. They had handcuffed him directly inside the service elevator, stripping him of his custom-tailored suit jacket and parading him past the loading dock workers. He was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, entirely denied bail, because I had frozen every single liquid asset he previously claimed to own. Traven proved to be exactly the coward I always knew he was. The morning after his public humiliation in my boardroom, he vanished completely. He abandoned his luxury apartment, abandoned his fake startup, and abandoned his weeping fiancée to flee across the border in a desperate attempt to evade the shadow lenders and federal investigators currently hunting him down. He left Chloe holding the bag for every single toxic debt and forged document they had signed together. Chloe was now completely alone. Her pathetic illusions of high society dominance had violently crashed into the reality of minimum wage labor. Stripped of her stolen credit cards and blacklisted from every public relations agency in Manhattan, she was forced to take a job folding clothes at a discount retail outlet in Queens. She spent her days wearing a hideous polyester uniform, drowning beneath millions of dollars in insurmountable legal debt, and dodging aggressive process servers. Patricia suffered a fate she considered far worse than actual death. Her precious socialite status was permanently incinerated. The elite women who used to drink champagne with her at country club luncheons completely erased her from their contact lists overnight. With Desmond's assets seized and her own accounts frozen by my legal team, she was evicted from her sprawling suburban mansion. She now lived alone in a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. There were no more galas, no more designer gowns, and no more stolen trust funds to finance her arrogance. They had all been completely buried beneath the permanent ruins of their own monumental greed, leaving absolutely nothing but cold, bitter ashes in their pathetic wake forever now. I stood quietly on this pristine sidewalk, directly in front of grandmother, historic Beacon Hill brownstone. The elegant brick facade looked entirely untouched, bathed in the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. I had not sold the magnificent property to a soulless corporate developer, and I had absolutely refused to let it fall into the filthy, grasping hands of Chloe and her criminal fiancé. Instead, I had transformed the massive, beautiful building into something with genuine, lasting power. I used my own personal wealth to entirely gut and renovate the interior, converting the sprawling, historic floors into a fully funded business incubator and residential shelter. The estate was now a secure, high-tech haven, specifically designed for young, aspiring African-American female entrepreneurs who needed the exact kind of financial protection and fierce mentorship that I had always been entirely denied. I walked slowly up the stone steps, running my hand lightly over the polished brass railing. Through the gleaming front windows, I could see young, brilliant women sitting around modern collaborative workspaces, mapping out their own venture capital pitches and building their own empires. They were safe here. They were fully funded, completely protected, and permanently shielded from the kind of toxic predatory forces that had tried to destroy my own potential. I had used my massive fortune to permanently protect the ancestral legacy my greedy father had so casually tried to steal. I had taken the very foundation of his unearned pride and reshaped it into a powerful fortress of generational wealth and unbreakable sisterhood. The dark shadow my toxic family had cast over this beautiful home was permanently erased, replaced entirely by the bright, fierce ambition of women who would never be forced to kneel before anyone. I smiled, turning away from the polished wooden door. I slowly stepped out onto the sprawling glass balcony of my magnificent new penthouse suite. The cool evening wind immediately swept across my face, carrying the electric, vibrant energy of the city. I leaned against the flawless, transparent railing and looked out over the glittering, endless expanse of the Manhattan skyline. Millions of bright, incandescent lights stretched across the dark horizon, resembling a massive, sprawling ocean of unlimited power and unimaginable wealth. It was a truly breathtaking, beautiful view, and it belonged entirely to me. I heard the soft sliding of the heavy terrace door opening behind me. Sterling walked out onto the balcony, his footsteps completely silent against the imported Italian stone tiles. He stepped up beside me, perfectly professional and entirely loyal, holding two tall fluted crystal glasses. He wordlessly handed me a glass of exceptionally rare vintage expensive champagne. I took the cold crystal stem between my fingers, admiring the steady stream of golden bubbles rising swiftly to the surface. "We did excellent work today, Sterling," I murmured, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the exquisite champagne. He nodded respectfully, his posture perfectly straight. "You executed a flawless strategy, chairwoman," he replied, his deep voice carrying absolute genuine admiration. "You completely secured your position." I looked back out at the glowing metropolis, feeling completely unbothered, utterly victorious, and wonderfully free. I had not just survived the suffocating malicious toxicity of my treacherous family. I had systematically dismantled their false empire and seized total control of my own destiny. They had desperately tried to bury me in the dark, forgotten basement of their massive corporate structure. But they failed to realize I held the deed. I did not just survive their endless cruelty. I bought the building they tried to bury me in, fade to an absolute black.